Hi, and welcome to a very special episode of AFPC Insights. I'm AFPC Senior Vice President Ilan Berman, sitting in for my colleague Annie Swingen. And I have an opportunity today to chat with former Virginia Governor and OSCE Ambassador Jim Gilmore and Jon Lerner, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute who previously served as a deputy to UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, on their experiences on a recent trip that they took with AFPC President Herman Pirchner to Ukraine, where they got a chance to visit the capital, Kyiv, but also to spend time on the front lines, as it were, in eastern Ukraine, as well as in the south of the country on the Sea of Azov.
Gentlemen, welcome. I'm delighted you could join me. Ambassador Gilmore, over to you. I wanted to hear your impressions from the trip and to get a sense from you what you thought were the important strategic takeaways.
Well, first, I was very pleased with the trip. I thought the American Foreign Policy Council put together a very high-level trip for the delegation. I was pleased to be there with Alex Gray, with Jon Lerner, who's of course with us today, and Herman Pirchner. I thought managed it extremely well, and the staff people who were on the ground in Ukraine did a great job of getting us from place to place. This was my first trip to Ukraine. Now, as ambassador to OSCE in Vienna, one of the principal focuses of OSCE, among many, many issues and conflicts and principles, one of the principal issues was Ukraine. So we addressed that. The American delegation and me as ambassador addressed that every week at the Hofburg in Vienna. But this is the first time I'd actually been on the ground in Ukraine. The meeting itself that we took to Ukraine, I thought was extremely good. They did not push us off onto secondary people. They had us actually meet with principals most of the time. And it was a very effective, comfortable meeting where we learned a great deal. So you could think about it in terms of many issues. One was the geopolitical issues, which I'll return to in just a moment. But they also had us meet with the Bank of Ukraine, which dealt with economic issues and their concerns about inflation. They had us address the issues of corruption briefly. They had us address the opportunity to talk to the political people, and that was very, very good. There was the opposition party to President Zelensky was quite direct in their criticisms of the administration. But as I think my friend Jon Lerner pointed out previously to me, that just shows how vigorous the new democracy is, because you don't see that in Russia. You certainly don't see it in Belarus. So this is a good step forward. And then finally, of course, we had the opportunity to travel onto the front lines, both in the Sea of Azov and also on the front near Donbass. So it was a very effective trip for me, and I'll conclude pretty quick. What I took away from the meeting was the intense interest that they have in their commitment to national sovereignty. I actually went there because the principal question I had was, if the Russians push against harder to them and they do what they did in Crimea and actually invade them, which they threatened to do in the past number of weeks by moving all those troops there, what will the Ukrainians do? And they certainly declared to me and to our delegation that they will fight, that they will resist, that they're training to do it, that they're better equipped to do it. They are very realistic about the fact that they need more of everything. They need more armor, they need more anti-missile activities, they need more airplanes. They need more of all of that, but that's only to the position that they intend to fight, which is useful because, they didn't last time, but they weren't as prepared as they were last time. They're very canny about what they believe their assessment is of their principal adversary, and that is Putin and the Russian Federation. If this looks like a civil war between Russian-speaking peoples, it ain't that. The Ukrainians are quite clear that they do not consider themselves Russians or in the Russian Federation. They consider themselves to be Ukrainians. They speak a different language. The government itself is unanimous in their position that they want to be a sovereign. They are unanimous that they believe that the best guarantee of that is NATO membership. Some of them are quite realistic about the fact that something a little less than full NATO membership might be sufficient. like a non-NATO ally status or something similar to that. But they're very clear about what they believe the Russians' intentions are. And the Russian intention is to create a new federation that would include all the countries that are today either sovereign or trying to be sovereign. And that includes places like the Baltic states, Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania. All these countries, they believe, are threatened by a goal of the Russians to have a sphere of influence. But they fundamentally believe that if the Russians fail in Ukraine, that they will fail in their strategy. And therefore, they will have to become a much more normal country and begin to look inward toward their own development of their own country, as opposed to trying to be aggressive and look outwards. That is what I primarily took away from this trip. The trip into Mariupol, the industrial city down there on the Sea of Azov, the trip out into the Sea of Azov itself to look at the Russian ships that are picketing out there, the trip onto the front lines and all the body armor and helmets and all that was very vivid. You could actually see what they were doing, and the Ukrainian army appeared to be quite competent. They had a great deal to say about OSCE, which I won't talk about right now. But I learned a lot as the former ambassador to OSCE about the position and view of the Ukrainians with respect to this. So I thought the trip was terrific. I congratulate Herman Pirchner on putting together a great trip. I congratulate the American Foreign Policy Council on what I believe was a success. So that's my first introductory summary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Lerner.
Thank you, Ilan. And I would echo Ambassador Gilmore's comments about the trip and about AFPC's leadership and bringing it together. It really went, it was enormously productive and high level and went off without a hitch. So I was grateful to be a part of that. You know, I was struck by how much the Ukrainians appear to be more unified than in their past about their direction. So since the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukrainian independence, Ukraine has, you know, more or less leaned toward the West, but there was always some degree of internal division on the question. At times, there has been elected leadership in Ukraine that leaned more toward Russia. In the wake of the Russian occupation of Crimea and Donbass in 2014, it appears as though those sorts of internal discussions have ended, and the Ukrainians are full square, making their choice in the direction of the West. Many of them were there all along, but now there seems to be, well, in a democracy, there's never unanimity of opinion, but there is overwhelming opinion in one direction. And from their point of view, you know, this is a clash of civilizations, that they are oriented toward democracy, toward Western values, toward integration with Europe, toward the American security umbrella. And they are fighting the opposite of that, not merely a regional, you know, powerful rival, but a rival that embraces, you know, autocracy, dictatorship, you know, opposition to human rights, corruption, and they very much see this clash that way. The question that is presented to the Western, you know, policymakers and the Western countries is the degree to which we want to reciprocate that embrace by Ukraine. You know, their view, I think, is what in many Americans' minds would be something of a nostalgic view of America, that the Ukrainians view America as the leader of the free world, the country that more than any other has come to its aid in its time of need against Russia, and the country that if it chose to, could sort of through its own leadership, essentially prevail upon the European countries to be more fully embracing of Ukraine. They even mentioned this really is aimed at those of us who have this nostalgic or some might say proper view of America's role in the world. They said that in Kyiv they are presently erecting a monument to President Reagan where a communist monument once sat. So they have decidedly made their choice, and it's really up to us to decide how, not just us, but the Europeans largely, to decide whether to accept that embrace. And there are a host of geopolitical and sort of moral questions that are connected to that. That is sort of the biggest takeaway that I took from the trip.
No, that's wonderful, gentlemen, and lots of food for thought there. So if I may, let me drill down. I have a question for each of you and then a question for both of you. So Ambassador Gilmore, first to you. You mentioned in your opening remarks, you mentioned the fluid nature of the situation between Ukraine and Russia, and the fact that the Russians have positioned themselves militarily in a reversible fashion, right? They've withdrawn some troops, but the pre-positioning of equipment remains, and there is a sense that the situation is still volatile. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also from your former perch at the OSCE, what have we seen historically in terms of Russian behavior? Theoretically, there's supposed to be a ceasefire. There's supposed to be a de-escalation. At least Vladimir Putin has publicly committed to a de-escalation. But is that actually happening? Is that really happening? What did you see on the ground?
Well, what the Ukrainian authorities told us, all the way from their intelligence to their military people, is that they are deeply concerned about the possibility of another Russian incursion. They did, I think they were very worried about the large buildup that occurred. It was clearly a message that Putin was sending, although we're not quite clear what it is. Whether they're signaling that a NATO affiliation is unacceptable, or whether they're simply trying to pursue their big picture objectives, we just don't know. And I think Russian scholars have to assess that. But I think the Ukrainians are worried about it. There is not really a ceasefire, not really. The OSCE has monitors there, which were referred to many times in order to try to monitor that ceasefire. And when I was ambassador, we heard all about the violations. I didn't get the feeling that the Ukrainian army was particularly comfortable with a ceasefire on that line, although they didn't shoot at me and Lerner, which is good. I keep wondering about that, to tell you the truth, because I'm certain we were in eyeshot of the so-called separatists and their Russian sniper units that apparently are in Donbass. So I mean, I see it as a real conflict zone still going on right now. And it may very well be that the Russians were simply signaling that they like the status quo and they don't want to change it, or they may be signaling that they're getting ready to do an incursion. I think that the Ukrainians are worried about that. Not that they're intending to fold. I think they're not intending to fold, and they're making requests to the West for further assistance. I think maybe a few things that I would want to say based on I'm not going to talk yet about all the learning process I went through on this trip against my OSCE experience, although it was considerable. But I will say that that at OSCE, I concluded, and everybody else did, that Ukraine is the hinge of the future of this ongoing conflict between Russia and the rest of the world. This is the hinge. If Ukraine succeeds, and it looks like they're intending to, then I think that they believe that the Russian strategy fails, and I do too, which would be a brighter future, I think, for all of us, to tell you the truth. I want to point out a couple of things. On the corruption issues, they placed a great deal of emphasis on the pro-Russian oligarch Medvedchuk, who they have indicted now for treason. Several of the people talked to us about it. One described it as a point of no return, if you will, for Ukraine. At that point, they were declaring that they were going to stop corruption and demand loyalty to their future. Also, I want to point out how proud they were of their Maidan revolution. They called it the Revolution of Dignity. They took us around. They showed us all the streets. They pointed out where all the previous snipers were in the revolution. They pointed out where they have shrines there to people who were killed during that period of time and martyrs, and they're very proud of it. And they have monuments there. They have pictures there of people. And these, of course, are symbols of what the independence and sovereignty is that they intend. I think that the big picture is that the Russians would like to see a change of the status quo in Europe. They don't like where they are. If they're going to continue to be an aggressive nation and they're going to seek a sphere of influence and use aggression to do that, they want to see a turnover of the status quo in Europe. Ukraine, it seems to me, likes the status quo in Europe in that they are in a position to move west. This is the clash of civilizations, the clash of ideas that you referred to, that I think is the ongoing issue that we all have to face.
No, there's a lot there, and I want to circle back in a minute to that. But Mr. Lerner, so following on this idea, Ambassador Gilmore talked in his opening remarks about the prospects for Ukraine in terms of integration with the West, and you talked about it as well. But one of the main points here is integration into Western institutions like NATO. And it's something I know from my conversations that with Ukrainian officials that they're very interested in, that they're very desirous of, if not full membership, certainly at least a seat at the table with the Atlantic Alliance, where they can have their voices heard and they can express fully what you gentlemen have about the nature of the Russian threat. So how realistic is that? What can we do to to speed and formalize and solidify that process from your vantage point, having worked in international institutions?
Well, I think it's a long process. It's not one that's likely to be fulfilled quickly, largely because of the attitudes of the Western Europeans, principally the Germans and the French. I think most American governments, going back to President Bush, who actually favored Ukrainian membership in NATO in 2008, would be satisfied with it, would be happy with it. The Germans are a problem. The Nord Stream 2 project is significantly harmful to Ukrainian interests. The Germans obviously perceive it to be in their interest. It's a big boon to Russia. And I think that the attitudes of the Western Europeans about the NATO question, go back, historically to the notion that they're sensitive to what in their mind is avoiding being too provocative of Russia. Interestingly, the Eastern Europeans, those who actually lived in our lifetime under Russian or Soviet hegemony and who face the Russian threat more immediately, are much more amenable to Ukrainian interests. The Poles, the Baltics, even Bulgaria, Romania are much more sympathetic to the Ukrainian position. So that's something that's going to have to be worked out, negotiated over I assume many years. However, there are many things that can be done to assist the Ukrainian security cause short of NATO membership. We explored that in our discussions with the Ukrainian leadership. One thing that was sort of striking to me, in 2017, President Trump reversed the Obama administration's position in favor of sending lethal weaponry to the Ukrainians in the form of the Javelin anti-tank missile. I asked the defense minister and the military leadership about that, and I asked them, A, how often have you used the javelins? And B, what impact have they had? And their answer was never and tremendous. And the point of that, which is very, I think, insightful to the larger question of Ukrainian integration into the West and American support for Ukraine, is that the fact that they've never had to use the javelin is the very point. That you know, they calculated that the Russians, knowing that the javelins are in the hands of the Ukrainians, would have to use 3 times as many tanks as they otherwise would have in order to successfully invade the country. That's a massive deterrent impact. The Russians, you know, like any other country, are going to calculate how much cost they're willing to endure in order to take such a military step. So there are plenty of things like that, other types of military equipment that would be helpful to the Ukrainians, short of, you know, going to the full extent of NATO membership, which obviously would obligate America to go to war on behalf, in defense of Ukrainian sovereignty, which is a large question for us to internally grapple with, as well as the Europeans.
No, that's precisely right. And I think that answer anticipated my next question, which is sort of what can the US do and sort of what should the proper calibration be? But Ambassador Gilmore, you, for both of you, really, but you alluded to it in your response to the last question, the question of internal political dynamics within Ukraine. One of the things that you hear a lot in Washington is that there's a sense of Ukraine fatigue that now pervades policy discussions. The fact that there has been a tremendous amount of talk about Ukraine and about Ukrainian reform, but we don't have very good eyes on what's actually happening in terms of political reform and transformation. So for both of you, since you just returned from there and you had these conversations, what's your sense of how Ukraine is progressing on anti-corruption, on building institutions, on solidifying that westward trajectory that both of you have discussed?
Well, I'm optimistic after the trip, and we were there, of course, as an non-official visit, although all of us were in government officially before, and the Ukrainians recognized that. But then I understand several senators went over as well just in the past, since we were there, they went over in the past week. I believe there will be ongoing discussions that are proceeding. And I'm fairly optimistic, to tell you the truth. I think that I think corruption is kind of a complicated issue, as a matter of fact. But they declared to us their intentions, and I think they were rather pleased with themselves that they actually chose to indict somebody who was undermining their sovereignty and committing treason, and also guilty of corruption themselves. So I think they're moving in the right direction on that. I thought that their bank officials were quite normal in terms of the way that they were approaching issues, in terms of their confronting inflation and trying to come back from the COVID epidemic. I thought that they behaved very much like a normal Western country, to tell you the truth. Now, we didn't get to see the opposition. We don't know whether there's a significant opposition there that could be turning the country over to the Russian Federation or not. We don't know, but I can tell you this: there isn't anybody in their government that feels that way. Uniform and complete and determined and capable people. I was very impressed with this group. The Nord Stream 2 issue is concerning. The fact that they're concerned about it just once again underscores the fact that they intend to be sovereign, and they're sensitive to anything that would undermine that sovereignty. I, as ambassador, always took the position that we didn't really had not really made a good enough argument about Nord Stream 2. We all understand that it's dangerous to Western Europe. The Ukrainians have said they believe it is a source of Western European corruption, which I believe to be true. They recognize the danger to it, to Ukrainian economics. Everybody understands it, but so what? The Germans' position is we don't care about that. If we can buy gas cheap from the Russians, we're going to do it. If you want to sell us gas, we'll buy that too. So I never thought that the U.S. made as persuasive a case. I am, however, what are the right words? Puzzled, mystified about the reduction of sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, that's signaling that the pipeline's okay with the United States. I don't know why we would do that. I'm just puzzled about that. And I have great trepidation about the ongoing summit that's intended. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. My experience is usually there's less behind the scenes than you think there is. So I don't know what that's all about. American policy is being watched by everybody. I want to just stop my soliloquy here by saying that when I was the ambassador to OSCE, I found the Western European countries to be very warm and friendly to the United States. The story that somehow there had been a separation during the Trump years, I found to be false. I also found that the Eastern European people were not only looking to America for security and leadership, but they were rather glad to be doing it. Furthermore, the Eastern Europeans made it crystal clear to me that they want no part of the Russians. They were rather explicit about it. They said, we grew up under this. We know what this really is. We don't want any part of that authoritarianism, and especially not Russian authoritarianism. I think all the signals out of Europe right now are good, except that I want to make one last reference to your Ukraine fatigue. I think that Western policymakers ignore Europe to their peril. I do not believe it is a stable continent. I could go on for another 5 minutes about that. It is not a stable continent. It is dangerous. And Europe is fundamental to American national security, and it should be paid attention to.
Mr. Lerner?
I'm delighted to hear, and I know that this is his view because we talked about it when we were in Ukraine. I'm delighted to hear that that Jim had such a good experience with the Western Europeans at OSCE. I could tell you that my experience at the United Nations was a bit more mixed with the Western Europeans. On some issues, they were terrific allies, and on others, they were not. On issues pertaining to Russia and Ukraine, they largely were supportive. To your question, Ilan, about corruption, I think that as everyone knows, it's been a long, vexing issue in the Ukrainian government and economy. My impression is that they are actually taking it more seriously than ever, and they are making real strides in the right direction, in part because they view the oligarchs there as being a tool of Russia to undermine Ukrainian legitimacy and success as a nation. So the Russian heavy-handedness has actually pushed Ukraine into a better posture vis-a-vis corruption. And if anything, in the Ukrainian political context, it seems that the principal opposition party to Zelensky's party is even more aggressive in its posture against corruption. And so there's some internal competition politically there regarding who can be the toughest on the corrupt forces there. So that is likely to produce positive results from a Western perspective. So I share Ambassador Gilmore's optimism about that. Like anything else on this, it's unlikely to be resolved overnight. It will take some time, but they appear to be moving in the right direction, and all of their interests seem to align that way. They know from an IMF and banking structure that they need to be better on removing the corruption. They know from an EU and NATO perspective they need to be better in that regard. So there's, they see their interests are very much aligned in that direction, which is as it should be.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your insights. It's always good to hear from people who have actually managed to leave their houses and leave their basements and traveled during this strange time. But I hope to have the chance to travel with you guys very soon. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much.